Hello and welcome to the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Tarik Samulski, joined, as always, by my co-host, Scott Pianowski. We're still in a break from baseball, a couple more days left. We're jonesing right now, but we had a decent All-Star game last night, Scott. Did you get a chance to check it out?
We had a perfect All-Star game last night by the Pianowski calendar because this is what I wanted. Okay, I wanted Shohei Ohtani to do something. Guy hit a bomb. I wanted Paul Skeens to look great. He looked tremendous. I wanted the Tigers and Red Sox players to acquit themselves well. Skubal pitched a good inning. Jared Duran, of course, hit the home run, won MVP. And I wanted the American League to win the game. I had a very modest prop, about enough to take a small family to McDonald's on the American League, who dominates the All-Star game. The only thing we need, Eric, and I know there's been some groundswell for support for this. Bryce Harper is one of many who have said this. Let's get the guys wearing their own uniforms. Why they wear these cheap uniforms and they look stupid. Nobody wants them. Nobody likes them.
You know why? Because uniforms. Right, exactly. They're trying to sell extra uniforms. But I did read
Nobody's buying that. Nobody's buying the 2024 American League All-Star uniform. No.
I did read a bunch of quotes from Manfred on Twitter where I think he basically acknowledged that the players have expressed this desire and it's something they are going to seriously consider. I think we're going to get players wearing their own uniforms by next year, and I'm cool with it.
And by the way, you could mix it up a little bit. Like, so you have Ohtani wearing his Dodger uniform, but put a couple of stars around it or something. I mean, make it's a special Dodgers / All-Star.
Somebody was also saying, let the players choose the City Connect uniforms if they want to use the City Connect uniforms. Like, isn't that kind of the purpose of these alternate jerseys? Is players, like, if the New York Mets, who love those black jerseys, and the black jerseys are great, but if like Alonso wanted to wear the black jersey, maybe to play the villain because he pushed his way into the All-Star game only to do dreadful in the home run derby, and then his teammates didn't get to play in the All-Star game, but whatever. But like, let's utilize that and then push those uniforms a little bit more, and then you could sell those uniforms if you're so worried about uniform sales. But yeah, I only watched it sparingly. My wife was out to dinner with a friend. I had the kid down and I had a night to myself, and I was just saying, like, I watch baseball all the time. I'm going to put on a movie and see what happens. And I tuned in for a little bit. I'm super happy for Jared Duran. I tweeted something out about the video that the interview clip that, was posted before the All-Star game, where he was just talking about how he uses coloring books after games to deal with his anxiety and like the clutter in his mind. I'm just really I respect how open he is with talking about the mental health side of the game and the things that he's had to do to deal with his own mental health and his anxiety. And so good for him to also get to have that moment on the big stage. So I thought that was a nice little cherry on top of the All-Star game.
Yeah, I want to co-sign that too. I mean, life is a grind as it is. Baseball, the longest season with the fewest off days. These guys just have to come back and back over and over again. All the road, all the travel. I realize travel's a lot better now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. These guys aren't traveling by covered wagon or anything, but it's a grind. And to be at your best in anything in life requires a healthy approach to what you're doing and a good mindfulness towards mental health. And anybody who's in the public eye who can be open about that and shine a light on that, I think everybody wins from that. And Duran also just one of the most improved players in baseball, right? I mean, he looks
for sure.
So and we always talk about this, player improvement, progression is not always linear. And he certainly looked like a lost player and was kind of not a Boston favorite either. There's one clip where a ball got behind him. It didn't seem like
he stood there.
Yeah, the city kind of turned on him briefly, but I'm thrilled to see him have this renaissance season for a team that's produced better than we think. I'm very curious to see what they do at the trade deadline, which is what this whole show is about. So if this week belongs to Jared Duran, I'm all here for it. But at the same time, it's just cool too. Ohtani hits a home run. Skeens, pushed to the starting assignment and he looked the part. And he got to face Judge. We all wanted to see that as only a one pitch at bat, but it did happen. So baseball gets a lot of stuff wrong, and sometimes they don't market their game right or whatever. I felt like, and we also had 8 runs, right? I realized there weren't a ton of hits. There were a lot of strikeouts, as there always are in any baseball game, but at least it wasn't like a 2-1 game. I mean, we saw some lead changes, or at least one lead change, and
a big home run.
Yeah, I thought baseball had a big win last night, and it doesn't always win the All-Star game, but I thought they did on this particular night.
Yeah. And Jared Duran is a good segue, because you were talking about the trade value. And at the beginning of the year, I thought with Tyler O'Neill, with Wilyer Abreu, with Rafaela, with Roman Anthony soon to come up, like all of these prospects for the Red Sox, that it seemed like Jarren Duran made sense as a trade chip. He was much older at 27 years old than some of those guys. The defense in center field wasn't great, despite his speed. So, was he better off? Was he kind of the odd man out? And it just shows you what a year can do in terms of somebody's value. And he's under control for the Red Sox for a few more years. So, they wind up keeping him around, and it may wind up being a really good decision. Today we are going to talk about trade deadline speculation. We're going to, go through some players we think are going to be moved, some guys who could see their fantasy value rise or fall the most, trades we'd like to see, teams who could make moves, etc. A lot of it is speculation right now, but it's fun, and we'll kind of see if we can also maybe highlight some players we think might be like buying or selling opportunities for fantasy purposes. Speaking of those terms, if you had to say what teams are selling right now, because I think it's probably the smaller group, because with the expanded playoffs, there are a lot of teams that are like within 4 or 5 games of the playoffs. And at this stage, they might still be trying to go for it, at least for another couple of weeks. If you had to lock in on like pure sellers, what teams would you think are definitely selling?
Well, obviously the lousy teams, right? I mean, the White Sox are selling, the Marlins are selling. I think the Nationals are lousy, but they're selling. Oakland, if they have anything to sell, they should be selling. But to me, what's fascinating about the sellers is I'm really curious what the teams that have reasonably good infrastructure, who probably won't make the playoffs, are they going to sell? Like right now, the Rays have a 16% chance per the Fangraphs playoff odds to make the playoffs. They should sell. Right now, the Rangers, the defending world champions, it's a lot of star talent. They just hosted the All-Star game. They got a bunch of star players on that team. They're 11.8% to make the playoffs. They've talked about selling. They should sell. The Cubs are 12. Again, there's a lot of talent on that team. They made a lot of investments in the offseason, 12% to make the playoffs. They should sell. And then you have like, what do the NL West teams do? The Padres, Diamondbacks, and Giants are all under 50% to make the playoffs. So at least I would answer the phone if somebody calls you. You should always do that anyway. And that's the fantasy takeaway too, right? Don't have untouchables. Somebody might make you a Godfather offer. Somebody always give somebody the opportunity to grossly overpay you for Shohei Ohtani. It would probably have to be like 6 guys, whatever. And usually, five fives don't equal a 10. That's like one of those fantasy credos that you get the best player in the trade. But there's a time and a place where anybody can be traded. I think Mike Trout is not going to be a career Los Angeles Angel. I don't think he's on the rundown anywhere. I don't think he'll be traded now. He's hurt, and it's just the timing isn't right. But I think at some point he's going to be traded. So the fantasy takeaway for this is just in general is this: have discussions, take the temperature of people. You never know who somebody might be frustrated by. A player can be great. I just traded for Imanaga in a league. He's had a great season. He had a couple of bad starts recently, one of them a 10-run start. And it was a fair trade. We traded Teoscar Hernandez for Imanaga, so it wasn't like anybody got it over on anybody else. I'm not even sure which side of that I prefer, which is the side of a fair trade. But don't be afraid to take the temperature of somebody. Maybe nobody wanted to trade Imanaga 3 weeks ago, and they changed it now. But just to put a pin on what you asked me, we know that the bad teams in baseball, they're going to sell or try to sell. But I'm really curious to see if Toronto – if the Rangers, if the Cubs, if some of these teams, the Rays, it's not your season. Too many things would need to go right. You're just better off making your tomorrow more favorable and giving them something today. Those are the teams that are going to be really interesting. I think we know a Toronto teardown is coming. I think it's going to be after the season, but they have some guys who may, it's a big decision to trade Guerrero or Bichette or something like that. They have some lesser players who might be easier to move right now.
Yeah, and that's where you see like the sellers maybe with like an asterisk where like I think the Blue Jays have all but decided they're going to sell their rental pieces, the guys who are not signed beyond this year. The Angels have said they're willing to trade guys not signed beyond this year. So like those teams are technically selling. Will they sell to the extent of like anybody could go? Maybe not. The White Sox look like they could give up anybody if somebody offered. And the buyers are interesting. I mean, there are only 3 teams in the NL that are really out of the playoff race. The Nationals, the Rockies, and the Marlins are the only 3 teams in the NL more than 3.5 games out of the playoff race. Even the Cubs, who you mentioned, are just 3.5 games out of the wild card. despite those poor odds on Fangraphs.
Yep.
They're 7-3 in their last 10 games. And now it seems like the Cubs might buy. So, you got the Cubs, you got the Giants, the Reds, the Pirates. These are all teams who they're 500 or under. However, they're in the playoff hunt. And so they, are they going to buy and say, we're going to make a run for it? Or I think the Pirates are probably a perfect example of the Pirates may be a team that sees they're a game out of the playoffs and says, we'll see what happens. We're not going to buy. We're not going to trade young players, but maybe they don't trade Aroldis Chapman, who seemed like a surefire guy to sell. Well, if we're a game out of the playoffs, why don't we just keep these guys around and see if we can make a run at it? But we're not going to add to what we're doing. And there are some teams that'll do both. There's a rumor out there that the Red Sox are going to buy and sell, that the Red Sox may give up, somebody like a Kenley Jansen or a Chris Martin, who is a free agent at the end of the year. And, they want to get something for them, but they may add in another reliever. Kind of like if you remember when the Mariners traded Kendall Graveman when he was pitching really well for them, and everybody was like, what are the Mariners doing? And they made another deal where they brought in Diego Castillo, who had multiple years of control. And now neither one of those guys actually really wound up having any staying power and in the bullpen. But the idea that you could see a team trade away a rental, but buy or add another player who maybe isn't as high profile as Kenley Jansen, but maybe the Red Sox get back like a Michael Kopech, right? And I'm just throwing a name out there of a reliever who has some upside, who's under control for multiple years and maybe fits the timeline of the club a little better and isn't saying, hey, we're not competing. So we'll see. Those are some interesting things to keep in mind.
Let me just piggyback on this for 1 second. As far as we know, certain teams are going to the teams that were World Series favorites before the season, your Yankees, Dodgers, Braves, Phillies, Orioles, they're all going to try to add something, right? And what are these teams that are in kind of that middle ground, like surprise teams that are leading their division, like Milwaukee? They have things they could upgrade. What do the Red Sox do? They could go in either direction. Kansas City hasn't had a winning record in over a decade. We talked about that in the last show. Or a team that's fascinating to me is the Mets. Okay, playoff odds on Fangraphs are just under 50%. They have a ton of resources. They have a hyper competitive owner. They've had some things not work out. I think for them making the playoffs would be a win. I think I could see the Mets being aggressive. And also, you talked about, again, the fantasy takeaway here, just in general for strategy, is so much of this is timing, right? Mm-hmm. You can go into your trade deadline in your league, which usually on Yahoo is in August, but it fluctuates. Some leagues may not have a deadline. Some leagues it may be earlier. And what happens sometimes is some team is such a runaway in a keeper league. Keeper leagues are really where the trading is more interesting in fantasy because people, it's just like baseball today or tomorrow. What are you playing for? In one of my leagues, somebody is so far ahead in first place that it's disincentivized the other teams to trade pieces for the future because they don't think they can win the league. One team is too far ahead. It could be a buyer's market and then trades could happen. Then it becomes a seller's market. And one thing my partner and I, Scott Gleason, I mentioned him a lot in the show. He's our trading guy in that league. We love to trade players and then flip them and get more for them in the flip than what we traded for them. So don't be afraid to pivot. Your league may be trading a certain way in the middle of the week, and by the weekend things could be different because a bunch of stuff has come down, and maybe teams are like, okay, we're closed for business, or maybe sometimes managers will make one trade. They want to make the one big trade. They make it, and then they close up the shop. They don't want to talk anymore. So a lot of this is playing the timing market. But as far as the buyers go, I'm really curious to see if those quasi contenders, the Red Sox, the Royals, the Mets, what do they do? Because nobody sees them as World Series favorites, but it would be a big win for any of those teams to make the tournament.
And who might they be buying? We'll go through some of the hitters and the pitchers. I think the biggest hitter name is Luis Robert. He is not a surefire thing to be traded. I think that I shouldn't say thing. He's not a surefire person to be traded, player to be traded. He is signed to a pretty team-friendly contract. He's arbitration eligible next year. And then he has club options. So not player options, club options for 2026 and 2027 at $20 million a year, which is a pretty solid deal for somebody of his caliber. So you're looking at 3 more years after this year of team control on Luis Robert. It feels like a haul the White Sox would be asking for. They could decide for 3 more years he is part of the team they want to rebuild. He's just 26 years old right now. Do you think Luis Robert gets moved? And what team could pay the price to bring him in?
I mean, the Yankees need another major offensive piece, right? This seems like the type of guy they might target. That's the first. I think it's probably 60-40 that he gets traded. And I would think the Yankees would be the first, maybe the Phillies. Those are the 2 teams that percolate to the top of my mind.
Yeah, the Phillies have seemingly been interested in every right-handed hitting outfielder. They want a right-handed hitting outfielder. And so Robert is obviously one of those. The Yankees are interesting because I think you assume they're paying Stanton so much money, and Stanton is coming back. So then you have Judge and Soto locked in the outfield. They just traded for Verdugo. He's kind of, people are souring on him. If you bring in Robert, your outfield is Robert and Judge and Soto, which is absurd. It's an all-star outfield. Do they have the money? What are they going to do with Verdugo? That does block Jason Dominguez, who's a big prospect for them. If they were to keep Soto, if they don't feel confident they can re-sign Soto, then bringing in Robert makes some sense. I think obviously you also can't count out the Orioles in anything like this. An outfielder for them, that they've been playing, Cedric Mullins and Colton Cowser in the outfield, and they're both going through some cold spells. Mullins has been a little better of late, but Robert is a clear upgrade on either one of those guys. The Orioles have the prospects. Robert is controllable for multiple years, so it's not a pure rental. It might be worth it to part with some of those prospects for a guy like Luis Robert.
And I'll tease this. I have a dream. I don't think it will happen, but I have a dream a huge Baltimore trade that I think I'm curious to see which side of it you prefer when we get to it. It'll be later in the show, but I have a big trade I would love to see the Orioles do.
I wonder if I have a trade they'd like to do. I'd like to see them do too. It might be the same thing. We'll see.
Might be.
A player that I think seems to be a given to be traded is Jazz Chisholm Jr. We've talked about him in the past. All the reports are that the Marlins are pretty much have decided they're going to trade him. He's also been playing some middle infield again, and seemingly teams are interested in him playing the middle infield. He's hitting .249 with 12 homers, 18 steals through 93 games to start the season, 25% strikeout rate. Has never kind of blossomed into the superstar that I think some people thought he would be in his injury-shortened seasons, but he's certainly a really good player and a good athlete and great, kind of power speed mix. It seems like he's definitely likely to go. Where do you think he could end up?
This just seems like a natural move for the Dodgers, right? They could use middle infield help, and I think Chisholm would benefit from just being lost in the shuffle of a team and not having to be a signature player. It's been frustrating for fantasy that his game is just leveled off, right? I mean, he looked like a star. He had some injury problems. He still gets himself out too much with his approach at the plate. But the first team I thought of was the Dodgers, and also maybe Philadelphia. We know they DFA'd Whit Merrifield not that long ago, and they could use a flexible player, somebody who could play a couple different positions, maybe percolate to the outfield, maybe play in the infield on the right day. So I could see maybe the Phillies being involved, but LA was the first team I thought of.
Yeah, he's been connected a lot to the Yankees with the struggles with Gleyber Torres and moving Jazz back to second. He's controllable. He has like 3 more years of team control. So the Yankees trading for him with Gleyber as a free agent would basically be acknowledging that Gleyber is done in New York. They could also then flip Gleyber to another team as a rental for the postseason. I don't know how likely that is. I have seen Jazz connected a lot to the Mariners, and to me that makes a lot of sense from the Mariners' perspective. The Mariners offense desperately needs another bat. We've talked about how easy it is to pick on them. He wouldn't necessarily make them less of a strikeout prone team, but like Jorge Polanco is giving them nothing at second base. Jazz could easily slide in there at second base. He's not going to take Julio Rodriguez out of center. I don't know if he can play left where they're playing Victor Robles. The concern is just like, what do the Mariners have to give, right? They could give up Jonathan Clase, who's their speed first outfield prospect that's been on and off the roster. That's not enough, obviously. So it would need to be more. Emerson Hancock is the Mariners' big trade chip as a 25-year-old pitcher, but like, do the Marlins want more young pitching? I mean, their rotation right now is a travesty, so they might, but they're also looking at their starting rotation for 2025 when guys are healthy and thinking it's probably a good rotation. The Marlins' home park isn't a great park, so going to the Mariners wouldn't hurt Jazz in that sense. Better lineup all around him. I think it'd be fun to see like Julio Rodriguez and Jazz on the same team, with like a big guy like Kyle Rowley. But yeah, I could maybe see that one working out as well. We know Jerry DiPoto wants to make deals.
For sure. And actually the Mariners, I could see them being a good fit for the next name on the rundown, which is another outfielder who might get traded.
Who's who, Scott? Who is it?
Randy Arozarena. Who's kind of turned it around. He got off to a dreadful start, right? And he was too young to think that Randy Arozarena can't play baseball anymore. We talked earlier about Tampa Bay. Do they recognize, and I think they do, that this is not their season. They should rebuild. And the corner outfield spots have just been dead zones for the Mariners. The Mariners, we know they're all pitching. It's a pitching park. I actually think the strength of their rotation is going to be muted a little bit in the postseason when everybody else's rotation gets shorter, and the Mariners having 5 good pitchers isn't as much of an advantage. But if they're going to go somewhere in the playoffs and the only team that's never made the World Series, they need to have, I think, another impact bat. Chisholm, you made a good case for him, and I could see them definitely being interested in that bidding. But how about Arozarena going west? I like that. Also, Atlanta, I think they can improve in what they're running out there in the outfield. We know they're not using their ideal roster right now, but I think they could. They've been really good in past seasons at getting less maybe buzzy names and not having to pay as much. We saw them make it work with Rosario. He's back with the team now a couple of years ago when they won the World Series. I think they're going to do something. Arozarena may be too big of a name for Atlanta. They may be more of a thrifty shopper at the market, but those were a couple of teams I thought made sense for Arozarena.
Yeah, I also think you got to add the Dodgers to that. The Dodgers outfield has not been great, playing Jason Hayward and James Outman and guys like that often. I know they've called up Miguel Vargas to play a little bit in the outfield, but Arozarena is a guy they could play every day out there. I in my head, I'm like, he's still arbitration eligible for a couple of years. So like, why would you trade somebody you have under team control for 2 more years? But he's making $8 million this year, so that will just go up in arbitration next year. He'll be 30 years old, pushing $10 million. And for a team like the Rays, who's always trying to manage their cap, they may say, we'll just get something for him now when we can, probably get a decent haul in return, since he has 2 more years of control. The Braves and the Dodgers are certainly teams where like, you could get, they don't have like, oh my God, this prospect is phenomenal, but you could get some good prospects from them. What if the Braves have these like fringy starting pitching prospects, like, Spencer Schwellenbach? Like, what if, Tampa also was like, hey, take Zach Eflin, take, Zach Littell, whatever, like give us somebody like Schwellenbach, give us some other young prospect hitters, and the Rays get a chance to kind of like get their hands on one of those guys. I'm curious. I think Arozarena stays. If I had if my gut had to make a decision, I think he stays. But I just don't know that the offers are going to be so great for him in the middle of this struggling season.
Yeah, 2 things I want to underscore. One, the Mariners 27th in runs scored. Again, part of that is the park, but I mean, just easily the worst offense of all the teams that have a legitimate chance to win the World Series. And Atlanta, I wish somebody had tapped me on the shoulder before the season and told me not to draft any Atlanta player other than maybe Marcell Ozuna, because they've all returned negative value based on injuries, based on slumps. They're 19th in runs scored right now, which is just hard to get my arms around. And you talked about Arozarena and what might happen, how a deal might get done, what might get added to it. That's another thing when you're doing these trades in any time of year, but especially at your trade deadline, is that you can have the centerpiece of a trade, but sometimes it's the fill-ins, it's the throw-ins. Don't be afraid to ask for a minor throw-in, a draft pick or somebody who's a lesser player. We in one of my leagues, we got Jackson Merrill thrown in pretty cheaply in a deal like 6 or 8 weeks ago, right before he took off. He was well-regarded prospect. He wasn't doing much at the time. We got him kind of as a throw-in, and now Anthony Volpe was the big player we were getting in that trade. And I was joking to my manager, like, Jackson Merrill might be the player we thought Anthony Volpe was, right? Right now he's the most important player we got in that trade. And man, has Volpe not done much for the last 6 weeks or so. But just remember that a lot of times these trades are centered around one player, but it's the extra guys who get thrown in. And don't be afraid. I'm not saying be unreasonable. I think if you want to have long trading relationships, you want to come from a point that you're reasonable with people. But you're buying a new printer, ask for a couple of reams of paper. Don't be afraid to, and again, I'm not trying to make the players into commodities or human beings and everything, but sometimes it's the things that are thrown into these deals that end up being the wonderful things down the road.
Yeah. You always got to see what else you can get. It's interesting to see if the A's see what they can get for Brent Rooker.
Mm-hmm.
This is just an interesting decision of like, where is this team in their desire to actually like build anything, because we have no idea.
Nomad team. They're nomad land, the Oakland A's.
Exactly. Because Rooker is making just $750,000 this year. He's arbitration eligible for the next 3 years. The salary will obviously go up, but he is under team control for 3 more years. He should have made the All-Star game. He didn't. But, he's hitting 291, I believe. Let me look up his stats for sure. 291 with 21 homers. Granted, it's a 33% strikeout rate, but he's going to be 30 next year. So even though he's under team control for 3 more years, he's not like, hey, we're going to build a real contender in Oakland. He's not on that team. So now is the time for them to get something for him. And I know teams like the Phillies have been linked to him a lot. But Oakland may just say, well, he's cost controlled and we can have him for another couple more years. And, then it is what it is. So I think the smart decision is to move him. I just don't know if the A's are always going to make the smart decision.
Well, the fact that he makes so little money is a selling point, because you can get more back in trade, right? Because you're not asking the other team to assume some big contract. And in the case of Rooker, when a guy is having so far in a way, his OPS plus is 169. He's never going to have the season again. Next year is his age 30 season, which that doesn't mean he's ready to retire. But the point is, this is peak Brent Rooker. His best season. He's cost controlled. He makes basically no money in the Major League Baseball salary scale. So you should be able to get more back for him. I just don't know if all the stuff that's going around, all the peripheral stuff with the A's, where are they playing? Oh my God, how hot is it in some of these cities they might move to? They're such a nomad team. It's so sad. And I every day I think about this, and I just imagine I want to go to bed and wake up and find out, oh, we figured it out. We got to have a park in Oakland. We're going to keep the team there. That's the best thing for them to do. I think the Vegas thing looks bad. I think the Sacramento thing would be an absolute mess. I don't know. I just wish they could find a solution to this. Maybe Nashville's going to have his team some year. Maybe could they be the Nashville A's? I don't know. But the fact that this is all unresolved and a mess, I don't know if that gets in the way of team business getting done. And maybe Oakland surprisingly doesn't do anything because there's just this cloud over them and they have all these distractions, and it's kind of a rudderless ship at the moment. Where are you, Billy Bean? He's running John Henry's soccer team, or whatever he's doing now. But so I wouldn't be surprised if Oakland, even though they should make a trade if they don't do anything, but if they do trade any hitter, you would think Brent Rooker would be the guy. And I like the Philadelphia fit, seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, Rooker is their most obvious trade chip to me. I mean, the Mason Miller stuff, like, I don't think they basically said they've stopped taking calls on him, unless they get blown away by some offer. I just don't see them moving Mason Miller. So I think it's Rooker or nothing, and the smart decision is to trade Rooker. And I guess we'll have to see.
Is there anything else in that lineup that you'd want if you're a contender?
No. I mean, JJ Bleday has been interesting and has made some improvements and tweaks. If you're a contender and he's a left-handed hitter off the bench and can play decent outfield, really good plate discipline. So maybe he draws a walk in clutch, that kind of vibe I could see. But in the lineup, no. I mean, I like Lawrence Butler. but I don't think that's a potential trade option there.
He's too young. They should be keeping him.
No.
It's just like trading Mason Miller is, even though he's a reliever, it just doesn't make any sense to me. He should be part of the next good team you have.
Yeah, I think it's realistically just Brent Rooker is the only bat that could theoretically be traded. Seth Brown would have been a great one, but he's had a terrible year.
Right.
And so I don't think anybody's trading for him, even as a left-handed hitter off the bench. But he would have been a thought going into the season.
And unfortunately, they usually have like a number 4, number 5 starter that would plug in. This year, they don't have that guy.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like maybe it's Paul Blackburn if he comes off the IL, but I don't necessarily see it. We have two teammates that are both potential trade chips in Washington, outfielders Jesse Winker and Lane Thomas. Jesse Winker feels like more of the sure thing, right? He's the veteran outfielder who was signed this year on like a prove it deal, who has proven it and been particularly good. And he seems like a more of a surefire rental and a trade guy. Lane Thomas, arbitration eligible next year, so he's under team control for another year. But he'll be 29. We know that the Nationals have a glut of outfield prospects coming up. We've seen James Wood. There's Dylan Cruz. Robert Hassel has kind of fallen off, but they have some guys where if they decided now's the time to get value from Lane Thomas, they could make a trade for him right now. Do you see either of these two guys being moved, and where would you see them going?
How about the Dodgers for Winker, right? I mean, he could be that left-handed corner outfielder that they've been looking for. And even Lane Thomas there, he reminds me so much of AJ Pollock, maybe not as great of his approach, but he's a power speed guy. He's at least capable defender. I think he's always been a little bit underrated as a fantasy player too, because he blossomed late in his career. And remember, Washington's already broken the seal. They traded Hunter Harvey a couple days ago to Kansas City, one of the worst bullpens of any of the contending teams. So that made a lot of sense. I think Kansas City might try to make another move for a reliever. I think Washington's going to trade at least one of these guys, maybe both. They're certainly going to try for Winker. It's just a perfect guy to move. He's not signed past this season, and maybe your capital. Also, it's hard to know. Like, oh, okay, Jesse Winker's found it again. Let's keep him. It's hard to know what you're getting next year. So I would think that he would. I think the chances of Winker getting traded are probably like 75 or 80%, which is really high for any player. I'd be surprised. They'd have to get no offers, I think, to not trade Winker. But maybe they trade both these guys. The Dodgers are the first team I thought of.
Yeah. Winker, interestingly, Winker has been connected to the Mets. He's got a history with some of the people within the Mets organization.
I like that.
The Mets are right now like playing some combination of Tyrone Taylor and Jeff McNeil in the outfield because Starlin Castro has been out. So you could immediately slide Lane Thomas Jesse Winker. Well, I guess they could do Lane Thomas too.
I love you said Starlin Castro, by the way. Starlin Castro has been out.
Starlin Castro?
Yes, Starlin Marte has been out too.
Starlin Castro has not been a thing for a while. You would not want him on your team. Starlin Marte is going to be out for a little bit longer, but he should theoretically come back. But you slot Winker in right field until Marte comes back. When Marte does come back, you make the decision between Winker, Marte, Bader, whatever. Bader also an injury-prone guy. So maybe Marte comes back, but Bader's dinged up. But Winker basically gives you that better version of DJ Stewart, of left-handed hitter off the bench who could also start in the outfield, start at DH. Winker can run a little bit. But I do think Winker at the deadline is set to be like a pretty big fantasy loser in a certain sense, just because so much of his value has been connected to speed, because he's been running more than he ever has in his career because the Nationals just don't care and they're just running like crazy.
That's a team. That's a team thing.
Another team may see Winker and say, well, we don't need to actually run you that often. He also may not get full-time playing time. The Washington Nationals park is pretty good for left-handed power. He may not see that. So Winker could unfortunately, lose in fantasy, even if he goes to a team like the Mets, who are theoretically an upgrade over the Nationals. I think the Nationals should move Lane Thomas. I don't know if they do, but I think the Dodgers are a fit there. We've talked about the Phillies already in for a right-handed outfielder, so I can see that.
And I'm just going to say, I'm putting the fist on the table here. The Mets are going to do something. The Mets are going to surprise people by being more active at this deadline than people think, because Steve Cohen has all this money and he's had everything go wrong for this team the last couple of years. And this year, they had a lot of momentum, and I know momentum, people scoff at that word and everything, but the game has a heartbeat. And when you have a 3 or 4, ever since Grimace, right? The Mets have been a pretty good team in a year that feels open. The strongest teams in baseball, for the most part, have more flaws or warts than we thought. The Dodgers have more warts. They looked like an unbeatable 109 win juggernaut. Now they just look like another good team. The Yankees, we talked so much about how top heavy they are. I think Steve Cohen's thinking right now, just get us in the friggin' tournament. And I know you look at their rotation, it's just not going to match up with the people they're going to face in the playoffs. But so what? I really think they're going to add something, maybe a couple of pieces, because Steve Cohen's just so competitive.
The Yankees also make sense for Lane Thomas. Like, they struggle to have somebody to lead off right now. Alex Verdugo, I understand they liked some of the things he was doing. Us as Red Sox fans understand maybe the downside of that.
But the closer you get to Alex Verdugo, the less interesting he looks. That's the way that works.
If you're a Yankee fan, like, wouldn't you much rather have Lane Thomas in the outfield the rest of the year than Alex Verdugo?
Sure.
And if for whatever reason, you are able to re-sign, if you do re-sign Juan Soto in the offseason, you can go into the season with an outfield of Lane Thomas, Judge, Soto, and have Jason Dominguez ready to go should anybody suffer an injury, or you just then trade Lane Thomas and move Dominguez to the outfield. But I think if you could get Lane Thomas, it definitely makes sense for the Yankees, and be curious to see if they make a move like that and move on from Verdugo. Before we move to pitchers, are there any hitters that we didn't talk about that you think are likely to be traded? I mean, I know that there's rumors been swirling about, Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette. There's been rumors about Nico Hoerner and Cody Bellinger. There's been rumors about, Christian Walker or Pete Alonso. Do you think any other notable hitters actually get moved at the deadline?
I'm just really curious to see what the Cubs do. As you mentioned, they're not, they're only 3.5 games out, but I don't think they have a real strong chance at going anywhere. So a Hoerner, a Bellinger, we know their bullpen, nobody's going to want any of their guys. I think somebody in Chicago could get traded. They have a little bit of a roster glut anyway.
I'd love, from a fantasy perspective, I'd love to see Nico Hoerner get traded to a team that wants to run more, because the Cubs haven't really been running, and it has hurt his fantasy value, because that's so much of what he does. So I'd be curious to see that. I do think that I think he might be one of the more likely ones to be traded. If the Rays are really doing like a rebuild, could they move Brandon Lau, who, they have guys like Curtis Mead, they have Caminero, they have guys ready to go. Could they move Brandon Lau and another team would take him on, knowing he could be a power hitting second base DH against righties? Could be curious to see.
I wonder, does Kevin Kiermaier still hit enough? He was under 200 this year, but he's still such a great defender. I wonder if somebody would take him on if they needed a center field and think, okay, just hit 210. Be somebody we can bat ninth who doesn't absolutely kill us, or a platoon player. He only plays part of the time because he's still such a good defender, and obviously he makes no sense for the Blue Jays going forward. He's already 34.
Yeah, I think Danny Jansen for the Blue Jays is likely to go. Him and Elias Diaz have been the catchers who are mentioned the most. Obviously, Elias Diaz being out of Coors would not be good for his fantasy value, but maybe Danny Jansen gets a full starting gig, which could be good. Could be good for his value at least. And then I was also just going to mention, I would like to see Taylor Ward get moved out of the, away from the Angels. But he's under contract for one more year, and so I don't know that they're going to make that move. But, there were some rumors the Pirates were close to a deal for Taylor Ward. Nothing has come to fruition yet in that. It might still. But that would be curious if we could get him to another spot.
I wonder if the Rockies would be interested in moving Elias Diaz. I think he's a plus catcher. He's 33 years old.
It seems
Colorado always tends to sit these things out. They never do anything.
It does. Well, they said they're not going to deal McMahon, so it seems like it's him and maybe Brendan Rodgers are the two Rockies hitters who might get moved. I don't know who really wants Brendan Rodgers, but I guess Elias Diaz, is respected and could be, a good trade chip for certain teams to see if anybody wants to kind of boost their backstop position a little bit. We're going to get into some of the pitchers who could be dealt. But before we do that, the Rotoworld Fantasy Football Draft Guide is back, and it has a bit of a facelift. Now available exclusively through a partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Rotoworld Fantasy Football Draft Guide to help you dominate your competition. Use promo code ROTOWORLD10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy, DFS, and betting tools. Now, go to nbcsports.com/fantasylife to learn more. That's nbcsports.com/fantasylife.
Good looking magazine too. I believe it's got Jamar Chase on the cover. So you want to pick up a copy of that as soon as you can. Get ready for the football season.
This one, Scott? Oh no, that's the last one. Oh, I ruined it, guys. Yeah, they're in a box in front, but it is a Rotoworld Draft Guide. It does have Jamar Chase on the cover. It looks great. I did my small part in it. Make sure you guys.
Oh, nice. What did you do for it?
Primarily defense stuff. That's my fantasy football niche is defenses. I don't really know how I fell into it, but I like it. It's fun, and also nobody yells at you too much when you mess up a defense call.
Defense wins championships, Eric. Come on,
because nobody's drafting their defense really early where you say a defense is going to be good and it costs them the week. So
give us just a defense tidbit. Give us like one small thing we can nibble on right now.
I'll just tell you that I have like a formula that I look at for ranking defenses, and beyond just stats, I really look at pressure rate a lot. So when things are normalizing, I look at, can teams get after the quarterback in terms of putting pressure on them, not just like, hey, this team has a big sack total, because pressure often leads to poor throws, poor decisions, stuff like that. And I think we overvalue teams that give up like too many yards. The way fantasy football scoring works, if a team is giving up a lot of yardage, even if they give up like 20 points a game, but they're making big plays on defense all the time, that's going to be a good fantasy football defense.
That's really good. I'll also throw out, I do a Q&A for Yahoo on game day on Sundays, and I get a handful of defensive questions. And almost always when it's an either or, if you're just looking for a 1 week rental, the team that is better reflected in the point spread is almost always the right team. You want a favorite defense. You like a team because you want the game you want them to have the game flow or the leverage in their advantage. The other team gets one dimensional, and then that pressure rate can really kick in. And I love that. That's one of the key stats for you to look at, which I agree. It's not just a sack total, but it's something a little bit more specific. But when in doubt, if you have one team, it's like a 4 or 5 point favorite. One team, it's maybe a better team, but they're on the road. They're an underdog. Take the team that's favored. That's almost always the best play.
Yeah. Speaking of favorites, I think the favorite to win the AL Cy Young right now is Tarik Skubal, but he's also the center of many trade rumors the last couple of days. Just like, will the Tigers, try to get what they can for him, given how good he's been? Do you think we see Tarik Skubal get traded?
I don't, but
okay.
My dream. I don't think this works 1 for 1, but if you were the Orioles and the Tigers, what would the Tigers have to add to Skubal to get Jackson Holliday?
That's interesting.
Baltimore's right there. Baltimore is so close. And look, I know Holliday's the number 1 prospect in baseball, but he's still 20. These guys don't always end up being great. And his father was a Major League Baseball player and all that. I can write off what he did in 2 weeks in Baltimore. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, Mike Trout wasn't good his rookie year. I don't care about that. But Gunnar Henderson is at shortstop. They're going to have to play Holliday somewhere else. Even if Holliday may be a better defender, Holliday's good enough at short. They're never going to move him now. I think he might be the MVP of the league this year.
Assuming that the Orioles also gave up like Kowser or Kjerstad or whatever.
Yep.
Could you see the Tigers parting with Riley Green?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh my God, that would be so great for everybody.
You slot Riley Green in the outfield. You're giving up, and you get the starter that you need. You give up Jackson Holliday. You give up, Kowser or Kjerstad, and maybe some lower level prospects too to get the whole ship going. And then the Orioles don't have to worry. The Orioles add an upgrade, but still kind of like a young upgrade. And maybe your argument is, oh well, Riley Green isn't an upgrade on Kowser and Kjerstad, but I think he is when you factor in like the defensive component of it as well, and the this season level of performance where, like, if the Orioles are trying to capitalize and win a World Series this year, he will help them more than like Heston Kjerstad will in 2024.
I think Baltimore's biggest need is a second starter behind.
Yes.
Granted, Skubal is legitimate ace, but I guess him and Burns would be 1 and 1A. Either one of them could start the first game of a playoff series. But if Baltimore wants to win the World Series, they have to go out, I think, and add somebody who's one of their top 3 starters in the playoffs. They have to improve that rotation. Their lineup is terrific. Yes, we talked about Mullins is the weak link, but whatever. They have like every time they set up their lineup, 8 of the 9 guys are plus offensive players. Nobody else can say that.
I think the next guy, Garrett Crochet, seems to make the most sense. The White Sox have said they want to trade him. That the idea is to trade Garrett Crochet. I think that he probably is the best starting pitcher on the market, or him and Jack Flaherty, right, have a case to be that. Crochet is arbitration eligible for 2 more years. He's 25 currently. There are some questions on like how his arm maintains this workload or whatever. He's pitched 6 combined innings in his last 2 starts as the White Sox try to like limit his innings. But the Yankees are apparently interested. The Orioles are interested. I think the White Sox are going to get enough in terms of prospect return that I think he gets moved. And the Yankees could, if the Yankees just give up Spencer Jones for Garrett Crochet, which they should, I think the Yankees can make this deal. And I don't think the Yankees need Spencer Jones. If you have Jason Dominguez and you have Aaron Judge and you're going to try to sign Juan Soto, like, go get Garrett Crochet to fill in the rest of this rotation.
What's a reasonable end of season innings for Crochet? He's at 107 right now. 150 strikeouts, just ridiculous. Leads the majors in strikeouts, leads the majors, of course, in strikeouts per 9. And the FIP is actually well under. The ERA is 3.02, but the under the hood stuff says he's actually been unlucky. The White Sox defense has done him no favors. But would you, if I were a contender, especially a team like Baltimore or the Yankees, who's already in the playoffs, I would try to back off Crochet during the regular season a little bit, maybe skip a start here or there, give him the fake IL stint, whatever. Because you need him in October.
Nick Pollock has talked a lot about this, that when you talk about the strain on your arm, right, and the strain on your arm over the course of a lot of innings, we don't often think enough about like relievers transitioning to starting, but the strain on your arm when you're throwing, like Crochet threw 50 pitch in 54 games in 2021 before the injury. When you are ramping up to 100% multiple times a week, that's also putting a lot of strain on your arm. So even though he only threw 54 innings that season, because he was throwing at max effort multiple times a week and ramping up multiple times a week, that in terms of what his arm is capable of withstanding, it might be closer to 130 innings, right? It might be bigger than just like, oh, take what his innings total he threw and add 30 innings to it. We're like, well, when you're coming from the bullpen, it's not exactly that type of exact science. So maybe you try to limit him to 140, and that's 40 more innings over the rest of the season. If you have him throwing 5 innings a start, like, you can keep him going. You just don't let him go that deep into games. And if he does go deep into a game, maybe you skip a start. Like, you could keep him in the rotation and just prevent him from going 7-8 innings. And I think you might be fine.
Do you remember, we're not that far removed from the year Strasburg had where the Nationals made the playoffs. They said, well, we had an innings cap in mind. We're not pitching him in the playoffs, which I always thought was missing the point. I get that you want to try to preserve these guys and everything, but when you're in the playoffs and you may just make one playoff start anyway. That's the whole point, is to try to win a championship, and to have somebody like Strasburg healthy could have helped them do that. Ironically, they end up winning a title after Harper left town, which is like one of those Ewing theory cases. But in the case of Crochet, if they could even keep him to like 160, 165, and then have him fresher. We talked a lot in early season. There are all those April pitching injuries, and how do you save the pitcher and different things. And it's this is such a huge investment. If we had a great way to do it, teams would be doing it. I think there's a lot of research being done, and maybe I don't know, maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we'll be doing it. I don't have the right answers. I do know that a contender, the simplest thing to me would be I would just skip a couple of Crochet starts. Just I don't want him throwing 200 in. I don't want him at 190 or 200 innings when the season ends.
Two pitchers that seem like locks to be traded because they're unrestricted free agents after this year and their teams are not going to make the playoffs is Jack Flaherty of the Tigers and Yusei Kikuchi of the Blue Jays. If you factor in like pitchers who have like an 80% chance of being traded or not, they might be the two best guys. I think they're both locks to be moved. I think there's a lot of places they could go. It seems like everybody is kind of into starting pitching. I mean, the Phillies have dealt with some issues. They could use a starter. The Braves could use a fifth starter. I don't know how the Dodgers feel about their rotation right now. The Guardians could use another starter. The Red Sox could probably use another starter. The Royals could use another starter if they're going to make a push for this. The Twins may say, Chris Paddock and Simeon Woods Richardson are not enough in the rotation to really go for it. And so, Flaherty and Kikuchi could be really interesting pitchers at the deadline.
Yeah. How about the Mets, right? We talked about they have a decent chance to make the playoffs. It's just under 50%, but they don't have that front of rotation. Here we come starter. Jack Flaherty could be that guy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And they have Cody Senga coming back, but he has his own injury concerns.
We have no idea what version of Senga we're going to get. Yeah.
Yes. I like that. I like that idea. And that could be one of those buy and sell things where like the Mets could trade Luis Severino because Severino is on an expiring contract and they signed him, I think, to trade him, and they could get a low-level prospect for Severino and then make a bigger move to bring in Flaherty or bring in Kikuchi, and they could upgrade the starting rotation while also getting a prospect in a deal. I think that's interesting. I don't rule out the Guardians. I think the Guardians need to make a move, and they may make a move. Like there are some lower-level starters, like guys who are almost certainly going to be dealt. Like Andrew Heaney. Jameson Taillon could be in that mix. Michael Lorenzen for the Rangers could be in that mix. Zach Eflin, Tyler Anderson of the Angels, guys like that. Where if a team is looking for like who's our fifth starter, right? Maybe you make a move for Michael Lorenzen or Jameson Taillon and add them as your fifth starter.
I don't think Kikuchi is that much better than the guys you're mentioning too. I think he might be in that.
I think he's so much better.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, I think Kikuchi made a change last year when he started going to his slider a lot more. And he had a really, really good year last year with that 3.86 ERA. This year, he had stretches where he moved away from the slider and he was trying to bring like a changeup back in. And when he did that, he had a really poor stretch. I think that there's still like he started the year looking like the pitcher he was last year. I think there's a second half stretch from Kikuchi where he optimizes the pitch mix again and is back to like a 3.8 ERA pitcher with plus strikeouts. So I put him above those guys. I'm also a Taillon fan. I like Jameson Taillon. I think he's your fourth or fifth starter because he's not going to really strike anybody out, but he has a deep, pitch mix.
You mentioned Heaney and Lorenzen, and we know the Rangers have said they're open for business. I don't know if John Gray's available, but would anybody be interested in Max Scherzer? What would they do with that?
Yeah, he has said he's not going to waive his no trade clause.
I missed that. Okay.
But I think, also guys say that. And then if all of a sudden the Braves want Max Scherzer
make a phone call for sure. Sure.
If the Braves want Scherzer as their fifth starter, is he going to say, no, I don't want to go to the Atlanta Braves? I doubt it. I think the Rangers would be happy to move on from that. I don't know. I don't really know that like they're probably not contending this year. And so why not get something for Scherzer? And I don't think he's the guy that they hoped they were trading for last year. So I could see that happening. What about, can I ask you, he's currently injured, but Jesus Luzardo was like one of the big names on the in the trade deadline. It seems like teams are still interested, but he's been terrible this year and now hurt. Do you think it makes sense for the Marlins to still try to move him?
I'd want to wait till the timing's better. You need something. You need something to restore consumer confidence.
Yeah, I get that. I think he doesn't get moved. I think he can get moved in the offseason. Some relievers, we don't need to go through all of this, but like relievers who seem like a lock to get moved. Carlos Estevez on the Angels, Tanner Scott on the Marlins, Kyle Finnegan on the Nationals, Michael Kopech on the White Sox. You have possibly Kenley Jansen on the Red Sox, so the Red Sox are contending, so who knows there. Chad Green and Jimmy Garcia on the Blue Jays seem like they could be moved. It depends. The Cubs don't really have any relievers. The Rockies don't really have any relievers. I don't think the Athletics are going to move Mason Miller. So that feels like it. Maybe the Tigers move on from like Jason Foley, try to get something from him. I think those are the reliever situations. We're going to end by talking about some of the things we hope to see. But before we do that, for the 10th time in history, Royal Troon hosts the world's best golfers who are competing for the title Championship Golfer of the Year. It's the only major where victory is best served out of a jug. The 152nd Open, Thursday through Sunday on NBC, USA, and streaming on Peacock. I'm sure you have some takes on that.
Yeah, final major of the year. I'm picking Rory McIlroy to win, and my sleeper, I don't know if he qualifies as a sleeper, but Aaron Rai has been a top 10 player in the last 3 tournaments. He just qualified into this tournament by good showing at the Scottish Open. I think Aaron Rai is going to be a factor again, but Rory's been chasing that major. It's been over a decade. He's been so close. We know he narrowly missed out to Bryson DeChambeau at the U.S. Open. I think Rory gets it done at Troon, but this is, other than the time difference, this is just one of my favorite weeks of the year. You got to wake up early to watch a British Open, but it's worth it. The golf is different. This is the birthplace of golf. What we play in America is, is a different, is Americanized version of golf, but this is where golf, was founded, was where the game came from. So if you love golf, you get to be engaged to the U.S. Open for all 4 days, the British Open for all 4 days.
A lot of stuff going on. We said we'd end with our projections and dreams, as I called them, just things we hope to see. Talk to me about a player that you think could see the biggest increase in fantasy value at the end of the trade deadline.
Yeah, I just have this sneaky suspicion that if Jazz Chisholm gets traded, he's going to be great for his new team. I don't know. I think he just needs a change of scenery, and we're going to wonder, why was he like a 245 hitter for the Marlins, and why did he hit 315 for the Dodgers? Maybe that's wish casting. Maybe it's because I've been burned by Chisholm the last couple of years, but I think he's going to I think getting out of a losing situation would be good for him.
Yeah, I think Jazz makes some sense. I mentioned, Brent Rooker going from the Athletics to, maybe going to a team like the Phillies, right, would obviously be a boost. Mm-hmm. I think you also have to consider the guys who could get jobs, right? So like Ben Joyce, who could close for the Angels, Andrew Nardi or AJ Puck, who could close from the Marlins. We've talked about the Orioles prospects, Kobe Mayo, right? Is Kobe Mayo moved in one of these deals? Does he finally get a chance to start? The Athletics have an outfielder, Colby Thomas, who's pretty interesting if they move Rooker and they can move Colby Thomas up. So keep an eye on some of those prospects who, could move into jobs. I think those guys could, quote unquote, win at the deadline. I think obviously Garrett Crochet being traded to a team that will keep him in the rotation and not monitor his innings as much as the White Sox would be pretty good for Garrett Crochet as well. What about guys who could be hurt the most at the deadline?
Well, if the Braves or the Yankees get the outfield upgrade, or the Dodgers get the outfield upgrade that I think they're going to get, then people like James Outman or the much kicked around Alex Verdugo, maybe Adam Duvall, maybe even Jared Kelenic goes back into a platoon. Those teams are going to be in business for offensive upgrades, and who's kind of their third outfielder right now, maybe squeeze for at bats going forward.
Yeah, I agree on that. And then I think obviously we talk about all the relievers, right? The guys who aren't going to close, the Tanner Scotts, the Carlos Estevez's, Michael Kopech's, guys who aren't going to be in the save mix, could certainly lose value. Some catchers, right, that are fringy, like again, in 2 catcher leagues. If you've been doing the dance with like any of the Cubs starters, Miguel Amaya and all of that, if they trade for like Danny Jansen, that could really hurt those guys in 2 catcher formats. So I think those are some guys who could lose a little bit of value. Yeah, I think the rest of it, like, you're not going to Brendan Rodgers, right? If guys leave Coors, Brendan Rodgers, Elias Diaz, those are guys who could lose a little bit of value by leaving Coors Field. I don't think any of the pitchers, like we talked about Jesse Winker potentially losing value if he's not in a spot where he's going to start every day, or maybe not as friendly of a home park. Michael Lorenzen, right, could get traded as a swingman, like a long reliever, loses the starting job. That could be a loss of value for him. If you had a dream trade, Scott, a dream trade at the deadline, I know you gave us one.
Yeah.
So if you need a little bit of time to think, I can go. But do you have a dream trade you'd like to see?
No, I know it's cheating to duplicate it, but I just, as the Tigers are my mistress, I'm a Red Sox fan, of course, but my dream is for the Tigers to get a Jackson Holiday type of player. It may cost them Skubal, it may cost them Riley Green. I don't think this trade will happen. But the other thing with Holiday is that let's just get this Javier Baez thing off the books as quickly as we can. Sure. You're still going to be paying him, but it's just crazy how he just doesn't know how to play baseball anymore. And I was talking to Joe Sheen about this. He was comping him a little bit to Tim Anderson, the guys who had kind of questionable approaches they got away with, and then the middle of their careers hit, and man, did the door just slam on those guys. So Detroit, they're right around, they had a nice run before the All-Star break. They could maybe be a 500 team. They're not going to make the playoffs. They don't have any upside. So there's a great window here. I don't want them to trade Skubal. I'd rather them trade Jack Flaherty, who I don't know year over year what he might be. So maybe a Flaherty to the Orioles for one of their, probably wouldn't be Holiday, of course. And even Skubal isn't enough probably for Holiday. I also don't know if the Orioles have the gumption to, it's just when you're trading the number one prospect in baseball, and then if he blows up into a star somewhere else, it just haunts you for the rest of your life. And I think teams are afraid to do things like that. So maybe it just, I don't know. I want Baltimore to improve. I want the Yankees to not win the division and then, look horrible in the playoffs and then have a lousy offseason and a lousy rest of their lives. I'm sorry. I'm a Red Sox fan. That's how I feel.
That's like David Ortiz during the interviews at the All-Star game. I'll give you I
don't mind if Aaron Judge hits 65 home runs. I don't mind if Juan Soto has a 427 OPS. That's OBP. I'm fine with their great players being great. I just want them to lose the games.
That's understandable. While I give you my dream trade, I want you to think about who you want the Red Sox to try to trade for at the deadline. That can be your Red Sox fan question.
Yeah, for sure.
My dream trade also involves the Orioles. And I think it's just like, it's easy to make dream trades constructed for the Orioles because they have so many interesting prospects that you'd like to see play. I would like to see the Orioles do a twofer and trade for Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet in the same deal. I think Luis Robert would be a fun bat in that lineup. I think he could play center field over Mullins. I think, maybe they probably have to move Cowser in that deal. Crochet moves into that starting lineup. They have the prospects to pull that deal off and still have really good prospects. But I think also that would give potential everyday playing time to guys like Kobe Mayo or Connor Norby or Heston Kjerstad or Colton Cowser, just like any of Kyle Stowers, right? Any of these guys could move to Chicago, play every day. All of a sudden, the White Sox are kind of a fun team to watch with these young guys. The Orioles are a powerhouse that have Burns, Grayson Rodriguez, and Crochet at the top of the rotation. I just think it's fun. I'd like to see it happen. I don't know if it's going to. Who would you like to see the Red Sox get to close down this podcast?
I don't think it's going to be Jack Flaherty, but I would love that. Let me give you a more realistic trade. They have Kyle Teal as a really interesting catcher prospect. Connor Wong has had a surprise breakout season. Could they trade Wong and get a Kikuchi, somebody like that? Somebody who would slot in their rotation as like a 3 or a 4.
Interesting. I've been interested in Jameson Taillon as like
I like that too.
Let's give the Red Sox a 4th or 5th starter where we don't have to go crazy and give them. Obviously, it would be great to get a guy like Flaherty. Hauk has been really good. Cutter Crawford has been good. We know that Nick Pivetta can be good. Bayo, again, as your 4th starter, Bayo is not bad and has some upside.
Such a tease, man. I mean, that starting.
You're not gonna bump him out of the rotation.
Yeah, I know.
Right. So you pick up a guy like, Jameson Taillon, and that could be really, really interesting. I'd be curious. Honestly, like I said, I didn't know if he'd be traded before, but I'd be curious if the Red Sox make a move for Jesus Luzardo. Like maybe his cost is so depressed now. He's under control for multiple years. Maybe he comes back to pitch in September, right? So you're making a little bit of a move for this year, but you're also giving yourself a potential frontline starter in the future if you give Andrew Bailey a whole offseason with him. Like, I think that could be an interesting thing if the cost of Luzardo has dropped enough.
Honestly, the number one thing I'd like to see them do is I would buy out Duran's arbitration years and give him a long-term deal. I know he's 27, right? But he reminds me of Jacoby Ellsbury. I think he's a star. And easy to say this when he just won the All-Star Game MVP and everything. But I'd like to see him in Boston. You know, we know that we'll never know if Mookie Betts wanted to stay in Boston or not, but they obviously bungled that. They made they got such a lousy return for Betts. I think they made the right move with what they did with Bogarts. Obviously, they traded Chris Sale for Vaughn Grissom. That looks horrible right now, but we'll see what happens when Grissom's actually healthy. But I want Duran to be a Boston Red Sox player for a long time. Now, granted, they don't have to do anything, and they can still keep him for a few years. But
right.
I'd like to see him, be a member of this team.
That then frees up. If you do that then frees up. Like maybe you trade Wilyer Abreu. You trade Tyler O'Neill, even though he's on an expiring contract, and you give him to somebody else because you can have an outfield of Duran and Cedar Rafaela and Roman Anthony with other good players coming, and you free up the logjam. So those kind of things.
We didn't mention Tyler O'Neill. I don't want them. I'm not like, please trade Tyler O'Neill, but he's on a 1-year deal. He's had a great season.
Right.
We talk about all these contenders need a decent corner outfielder. He could even play some center. He would be a great Phillies fit. He would be a great Dodgers fit. He would be I don't want him to trade him to the Yankees. He'd be a great Yankees fit. Almost every contender could use a player like that. So I wouldn't blame Breslow, who's running things now. Also, I'm just petrified they're not going to keep Cora, who's a really good manager. I would be sick if he was like the Yankees manager next year, but I want them to. So I guess the first thing I would do maybe is try to sign Cora to an extension. Although I don't think they're going to talk about that during the season. But a lot of moving parts. Tyler O'Neill's the type of guy they should probably trade. They got him, prove it deal. He's proven it. And you know what else? You could always trade the guy and then negotiate with him when he's a free agent. Yeah. Trade him for something and then sign him to come back.
Yeah. A lot of moving pieces. It'll be fun over the next couple of weeks. We will obviously keep you updated on all of that stuff over at NBC Sports, over on the Rotoworld Baseball Show. You can check me out on Twitter at SamskiNYC and Scott at Scott_Pianowski. If you go to NBCSports.com today, you can check out my updated top 100 starting pitcher rankings. So make sure you do that, and we'll be back with more fantasy baseball discussion next week on the Rotoworld Baseball Show.